Yeah, she said she had to jump off for a minute. So Joel, if you wouldn't mind opening ceremonies.
The opening ceremonies. Well, tonight we were supposed to have 3 presenters. We're only going to have 2. And the first 2 are from the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, and they're going to put on a presentation, and that includes Josh Stahl, who's here, and Josh is the Deputy Director of Pre-Development Planning. Is Uriah Johnson going to join us?
Uriah's not joining us tonight.
Okay. So, and Josh is going to tell us about an RFP for Bedford and Church Avenues and the Flatbush African Burial Ground Remembrance and Redevelopment Task Force. Those are one and the same or 2 different things?
Those are one and the same. One and the same.
Okay, so without further ado, we welcome you. This is a joint meeting of 2 committees together, the of CB14, the Transportation Committee, of which myself and Deborah, who's here, Deborah Ballantyne, are co-chairs, and the Community Environment Committee, and the chairs are not here for that at the moment, but they'll probably join us.
Yeah, we are expecting Donald Loggins to be on in a minute, and Nina Subgir to be back in a minute.
Okay, and is Andy here as just an observer, or is he got is he going to speak? Do you know?
Andy Inglesby will be presenting on the zoning, the transportation zoning text amendment in the second.
Okay, got it.
In the second phase of our program.
Okay, so welcome, Andy. So take it, Josh.
Thank you, Joel. And I actually have a presentation to share. I'm looking at my system preferences. I'm not sure if I can open it without, it's asking me to quit and log back in. So I'm going to try to open it. If I disconnect for a second, I'll be right back. Unless if it's easier, I can just send it to someone and that they can do that. But let me try to do this.
Do you have the share screen option, Josh, at the bottom of your screen there?
It's grayed out and I have to open my system preferences, unfortunately, and then it tells me that to enable it.
Give me one moment and see if it works if I just switch something over.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you may have the same issue, but did that help at all? I just made you the host rather than the presenter.
Unfortunately, I still have the same issue. So let me, I apologize. I should have checked this beforehand, but let me quit and come back in, and then hopefully we'll get started right away.
I see Donald is here.
Yes, I'm here. I'm back.
Donald is the co-chair of the Community Environment Committee.
Correct. Are all our guests here?
Yes.
Oh, shall we start?
That are
Well,
coming.
Donna, we opened the meeting and we're waiting for a presenter to log back on so that he's able to share his screen. So that's the current pause.
Okay.
But he should be right back with us.
And it looks like he is back with us now.
Okay, I'm back on, and now I see the share button's on, so let me just bear with me for a second. I believe I'm now sharing a screen that says Bedford Church RFP. Does everyone see that?
Yep.
Give me a
I
thumbs
see
up.
it, yes.
Great. And mind the construction noise. I think they're still going on outside. It's not my apartment, although it's a beautiful day. I wish I was elsewhere, but or at least in person. But firstly, thank you for the committee and also to Sean, who has really been a great partner, both for the task force that was formed for this project. My name is Josh Saul, and I'm presenting what we're calling the Bedford Church RFP. And with this project, it's a housing RFP, but it's much more than that. And I'll talk a little bit more into it, but as a parallel process, the council member and the borough
Eugene?
president invited everyone we formed a task force. So you were asking me for, is it the same project, the Flatbush African Burial Ground Task Force and the RFP? And as I mentioned, they're one and the same, as they're working together for this project. Just to give you a little bit of a project background, the site that we're talking about is on Bedford and Church. It's a vacant lot right now. It was previously the home of the PS90 school building that had to be demolished in 2015. And it is also believed to have been the location, or part of it is the location of an African burial ground. I'll speak more about that later. We can talk about that a little bit more afterwards. Just in terms of how we got where we are today, in October 2020, so about 6 months now or 7 months ago, the mayor and the council member Eugene announced this site would be in the pipeline for a development of at least 100 affordable housing units, as well as a youth-oriented community space. But at the same time, we recognized how important it was, as there were previous archaeological investigations on the site back when the demolition was happening, and even prior to that, that uncovered artifacts as well as limited disarticulated human remains on the site. So when this was announced, with the help of EDC and a consultant they brought on board, the council member and the borough president formed a task force of community leaders, and that includes Sean, who's here with us today, to really discuss the best approach for how we can develop affordable housing and provide a youth-centered community space while also really memorializing the history of this site, this very important history, which has not been told and is not very well known, and honoring really what the site should look like in the future. Just a little context, for some, this might be helpful. You guys know the community much better than I do, but it's on the southeast corner of Bedford and Church, and it's right next to the Erasmus education campus, and across from the gas station on the corner. So it's quite a prominent site, and with quite a history, and it's really a great opportunity both for all of us to collaborate together to bring both affordable housing, but also to recognize the history, both of former slaves and freedmen of Flatbush and like the 19th century history of the area as well. So to speak a little bit just about that and the task force, as I mentioned, it's co-chaired and it was formed by council member Eugene, as well as the borough president Adams. And the other members include representatives from neighborhoods, cultural institutions, schools, businesses, community, and faith-based leaders as well. It started in December 2020, and it's scheduled to meet through mid-2021, although the task force might choose to remain to continue meeting throughout the life of this project. And really what we've been working on with the task force and what's different from this site, as opposed to a lot of our other HPD affordable housing RFPs on city-owned land, is that the task force is really able to dive more deeply into what's a complicated history here with the archaeological findings, the important component of memorializing the history of the site and the history of African descendants in Flatbush, but as well as just developing on public land and how we do that with affordable housing. All the meetings have been live streamed and recorded for public review. I'll share that information afterwards as well and distribute that information. We actually have another meeting of the task force tomorrow, which I invite all of you to join. But all that information is on a centralized website, which I'll pull up later as well to show you guys. In terms of how the task force relates to the actual request for proposals that HPD will be issuing, we're anticipating to issue this in the summer. The task force is really there to help us with the community engagement, provide feedback, and inform a report that will be part of the RFP and part of the criteria, which the city will then use to select a development team to develop the site. So part of that is the task force, and the other part is the actual community engagement, which I'll speak about in a little bit. As a first step, though, we did issue a request for qualifications back in January, and that was just to get a list of developers who were interested in applying, which we were reviewing, and we're just reviewing their qualifications. So before opening this up to the entire development community, we really wanted to hear who was interested in applying, and also if they were a mission-driven organization that really had a vision here for an affordable, high-quality project that is sensitive to the historic significance of the site and to its importance to the Flatbush community. The next step is that we will be expecting to, or next step in terms of documents and the official procurement process, is that we're expecting to issue an RFP, which to the applicants that are qualified in the summer of 2021. As part of that RFP, we lay out basic requirements, but we also seek to really highlight the priorities and the goals that are articulated through the task force recommendations, as well as the public feedback that we will get through upcoming workshops, which, as I mentioned, I'll talk about. As in with any HPD affordable housing RFP, it's the city agency, HPD, as well as our partners evaluate based on how the proposals evaluate those criteria, including the priorities and goals that are expressed through the task force recommendations and the public feedback that we receive through the workshops. So in terms of how we actually go about those workshops and the task force, I talked a little bit about the task force, but we're also doing community engagement in some workshops that are going to be upcoming in May. And our goal really is to open this up to the entire community. So unlike the task force, this will be open to whoever can attend, whoever attends that day. And we try to gather nuanced feedback to understand what the community's vision for the site is and what the housing needs are of the greater community. So usually we get in the past, about 100 or so attendees from the public and a good cross-section of members of the public to really inform the priorities of our RFPs. The other important aspect, though, is that we want to both inform the community about the key factors that have to do with the site's development and listen to what they would like to see for the programming. And the three main focus areas for that will be what kind of design and site plan they'd like to see here, how that incorporates the memorialization aspect related to the history of the site, as well as the focus on non-residential uses, which I mentioned will be youth focused uses, but might also include other uses. In doing so, we gather that information that we get from the public meeting, and we put together a visioning summary, which effectively communicates all these priorities to the prospective development teams that apply. So a little bit just about those workshops and the outreach strategy, and this is where I think the community board, as well as the task force, will be really of great help in advertising this and spreading the word. We have a project website right now. I believe the link, it's and I'll give this to you guys later too. It's FABG, so Flatbush African Burial Ground, that's the acronym, taskforce.nyc. And the website includes some basic information about the site history, and it also allows you to access previous recordings of the task force, presentation notes, and the schedule of future meetings. As part of the outreach, we're also planning to have a questionnaire because we acknowledge that not everyone can attend these workshops. So we want to include people who aren't able to attend the workshops and get feedback on what they'd like to see on the site. And that's going to be opening up, I believe, later this week and conclude on May 28th. So we'll work with Sean to get some of those questionnaires to the community board to make sure that members of the community can give feedback on the site as well and learn about the site if they're not able to attend. And this will be available both in paper as well as online. So we'll get some of those paper copies to you guys. In terms of the actual workshops, they're scheduled now, and we finalized this. It's going to be Wednesday, May 5th from 6 to 8 p.m. hosted on Zoom. And that first workshop will focus really on honoring and memorializing the site's history. And then the second workshop will be on May 22nd from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. for noon, and that will be on the affordable housing and what type of affordable housing the community wants to prioritize here, as well as some of the non-residential uses. And there's obviously some crossover here between how we memorialize the site's history and the non-residential uses, but we really think that this is a great opportunity to build a comprehensive project that can really be an anchor on this very prominent site in the neighborhood and serve to memorialize both the history here at Flatbush, as well as provide affordable housing and other community amenities. Here on the right, you see like the flyer. We'll be distributing more of those digital copies, as well as handing those out in person. Some of the staff that from HPD will actually be canvassing the area, I believe, later this month, just to get the word out. But we'll also be doing social media outreach and asking people to, if they can, RSVP in advance, because that helps us a lot of times just figure out how many breakout rooms we need, especially with all these digital challenges that can sometimes occur. And it'll just help us plan a little bit better. So just to sum it up, big picture wise, this project really, we're talking about the beginning right now. The task force kicked off in December 2020, and we're starting the community engagement now, including today by presenting to the community board, although we'll be coming back to the full board to make the announcement as well about the public meeting, the workshops. And that will result in task force recommendations and workshop recommendations that will be incorporated into the request for proposals for a new affordable housing development, which will be issued by the end of the summer, at which point we have developers propose, submit proposals, and we review them, and we select a developer, and we anticipate doing so in about a year or so in mid-2022. The important thing is that when we select a developer in a proposal, it's not the end by any means of community engagement. It's really just the next step. We would go back immediately to the community board, introduce the development team, and that includes usually different, whether it's the architect, developer, property management, to really have a comprehensive discussion of not just concerns about construction, all those things, but what the program is for the site, what type of affordable housing it is, the affordability levels, the marketing that will happen. And there's a conversation really that goes back and forth between the community, HPD, and the developer that we facilitate, leading through the pre-development planning in 2023 and an anticipated ULURP for the disposition of city-owned land to the development team, which we hope will be by 2023, and then construction start and construction closing in the following year or two. And this is a very tentative timeline. A lot of these things depend on how complex it is to go through the pre-development process, the availability of financing, but we hope to kick off the construction in about 3 to 4 years and finalize that a year or two afterwards. So we're talking about a project that won't be finished and tenanted till at least 2026, 2027. We really are aiming to have a robust discussion, both with the community board, through the task force and the public workshops, to make a better request for proposals document that can then lead to a proposal which will come back to the community and hopefully continue those productive conversations through a ULURP process and towards a construction closing. And the final product being a great housing development that both memorializes the important history of the site, not only by providing affordable housing, but also by providing a space that will serve the youth, and also providing some form of memorialization given the history of the site as a former African burial ground and the history of generally African burial grounds in the city and the community of African descendants in Flatbush during the 19th century, going all the way to the present. So with that, I'll kick it out. I imagine there's a lot of questions and clarification, and I want to make sure I leave a good amount of time for that.
Co-chairs, if it's okay if I just quickly jump in, I do want to point out that we've put the task force website in the chat. I also added the link that would get you to the live stream for tomorrow night's meeting. And then there's also the, if you go to the task force website, you'll see the flyers for the workshops. And then I also added the Community Board 14 projects tab in the chat, because that has both a link to this project as well as our upcoming presentation on the zoning text amendment. And I just want to remind everybody, every day that you don't check out the Community Board 14 website is a day that you missed something fun and or interesting. I see Co-Chair Nina Subgir has her hand up, so she can call on herself.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just curious about what the process was, or how they were able to verify what the remains were.
So it's,
I mean, human remains.
Sure. I'm by no means an expert in this field of archaeology. I'll start off by saying that the website has some interesting information as well, but it was actually dating back to work that was done, I believe, back in 2000, when there was some construction related. I believe that it went from being a public school to possibly having a private school, and then there were some possible traces of human remains when they're doing construction. As soon as you find something like that, you have to report it. And then there was a archaeologist that was hired to do a study that worked with, that's certified by the Landmarks Preservation Commission or the Archaeological Board as well. And they moved forward. They haven't actually done they did some initial excavation and explorations in 2001, but most of the research that they've done, because you don't want to disturb those human remains, given the sacredness of you know, and the importance of the sensitivity of that is they do a lot of documentary research. So they look back at documents indicating former location of, you know, like these old maps from 1840, 1850, where there might have been an African burial ground. They know historically where there were some cemeteries already on site and whether it might have overlapped with this site at some point. And through that, they're able to do some of this information. But of course, we don't know with 100% certainty what we believe, and there's DNA testing that is done as well. So when this project would actually start construction, there's a whole process for handling any human remains that are found. And there's one of the things that we've been talking about with the task force is what's the most sensitive way to do that, and whether they are reinterred in a different cemetery. One of the things that is often the first step is to try to find the descendants, if possible. If they're doing a DNA test, that is often very difficult, though. So often there's communication with local religious, whether it's churches, synagogues, masjids, whatever it might, the institutions might be, to try to make that connection as well and try to see how they can respectfully treat the human remains. So we've talked a little bit about memorializing that history as well with the task force, through whether it's through ceremonies, and there's some great examples of this throughout the city as well that I can relay afterwards, and Sean could probably also comment on.
Thank you.
Glenn Woolen also has a hand up.
Thank you. I'm looking at the map. I see that this is right on the border of Community Board 17 and very close to Community Board 9. I'm wondering if you're engaging these other community boards in this project as well. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Glenn. We've been engaging, there's a representative from, I'm forgetting her name right now, maybe Sean remembers, from Community Board 17 as well, because it is right on the border. And we presented to them, I believe, last week. So we've been engaging both community boards. We have not reached out to Community Board 9, though.
I believe that there's going to be, there's going to be preference for Community Board 14 residents in housing. This is way further down the line, and I believe that will be afforded to Community Board 17 residents as well, since it is right on the border. I'm trying to share as little as possible, but the city recognizes the proximity of the other board.
I have two other hands up. The first one was Barden Prasant, followed by Shahid Khan.
And Ms. Yoon, we do see you too, and we'll call on you after these next two speakers. Thank you.
Hi there, thanks. Out of curiosity, will the board have a chance to see the RFP summer, either before it goes out or concurrently? The wording of such documents can be kind of ticklish.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to put it. So what will be made public is the task force recommendations. Usually the way we do it, and a lot of people have asked about this and whether this means it's more or less important. The recommendations of the task force and the public workshop and the community board and the community really puts forth are included in the RFP as part of the criteria. And we look to release that always and share that with the community board before the RFP is released. So we're highlighting like the way that's going to be presented in the RFP. And then when the RFP is released, it's put to everyone, right? It's posted and it'll be available. But we don't share it with the community beforehand because it is a competitive process. So we have to make sure that it's not fully available, but the report that talks about the recommendations, which the RFP points to. So instead, usually like our reports can be, I don't know, I want to say about 20 pages or so. I don't know how long this one will be because it's a much more involved process with a task force. But the RFP directly states that teams that thoughtfully incorporate and respond to those recommendations gain a competitive advantage. So really by reviewing the report with the public and with the community board, you already have an idea of how the developers get an advantage. Of course, we evaluate based on many things, right? There's basic feasibility questions about proposals that we have to evaluate, both from a construction point of view and from a financing point of view. So you might have the best proposal that meets all the recommendations, but if it's not financeable, it will never get built. So it's kind of a non-starter. You're going to have all sorts of extremes. Hopefully we have one that's amazing at meeting all the priorities that are outlined in the report, as well as feasible from a financing perspective, compliant with design requirements that are set forth by the city, as well as regulations around American Disability Act and fair housing and all kinds of components. So all those things is how all those criteria really goes into what the city evaluates and how they select the development team.
I'm going to guess that asking to see the short list before you make the decision would be a little bit beyond the pale.
It's usually, yeah, I definitely understand. I get this question a lot. My team, so I've been with this team for 5 years now, I think, and I've issued, I don't know how many RFPs, and we get asked this question a lot. And the reason why it's so difficult to share information about the RFPs before it's designated is because it's a competitive process. There's a lot of potential, even for conflicts of interest, and that could be even without people knowing it, if that makes sense. So like if there's like a tenant that's included in a proposal and someone is doing business with them, it can just lead to so many messy situations that we want to avoid. So it's not for like lack of community input, but it's really for a lot of those concerns that have to do with conflict of interest and making sure that the process is seen with integrity, protect, from all sorts of lawsuits that might occur if there is appearance of conflicts of interest, given that it is a large, it's a reward, right? This is city-owned land, and we take it very seriously that we're transferring that to a developer to be developed.
Got it. I understand. Just thought I'd ask. Thanks very much.
No, hopefully that's helpful, the response. People get frustrated with the answer sometimes, but the world we live in.
Next question is Shahid Khan.
Yes, good evening, everybody. And actually, my question is that as I'm living at Foster and Coney Island Avenue, which is very famous with the name of Little Pakistan. So we have a big Pakistani community and South Asian community, and we are living especially on joint family system. But due to that problem, actually we don't have too much housing facility in this area, especially from Avenue H to Avenue C. We have a big shops and Pakistani gas station and mosque and grocery stores. There is a lot of businesses. So people prefer to live in the same area. But due to non-availability of housing facilities, so one room apartment and people are 6, 7, 8. So we are looking for a better opportunity for a housing facility so people live with some rest without depression and live with their families. So it is a big problem in our this area. So we need to think about this situation, please.
So Shahid, thank you for that. I think that's something that we hear in almost every community, and we know it's an issue here as well. Just the need for affordable housing, that we're in a crisis that is really multiple crises and very complicated. And while this is one of the projects that we have, and it's not going to be online and marketed for another 6 years. I think hopefully most of you are familiar with Housing Connect. I'll put the link right now in the chat, just so you can see what the available housing. Not sure. Let me see if I can. I'm having some trouble putting it in the chat, but I'll try later. If not, I'll send.
Yeah, we can try to get it for you, Josh, while you're continuing to answer questions,
Right,
and
yeah.
we can add it to and we're going to try to have HPD back again before we break for the summer to talk about housing quality. It's something that they've been offering to do for a while, and we were kind of waiting for new appointees to come into the board. So we're going to try to snag them before the summer gets here, and we can talk about the greater community in that context if you want to try to still focus on this particular project tonight.
Sure. Yeah, no, and I'll just say really quickly what HPD does. We finance new affordable housing. We also finance preservation, and then we also make sure that housing quality and the housing maintenance code. So we have inspectors, just like DOB does, for housing quality issues. And it's different groups within the agency, but we all work together, and the mission is to provide all New Yorkers with safe and affordable quality housing. For this specific site, we have a very special opportunity because the city does not own much land that is vacant, especially in this community. So it's really an opportunity to build new affordable housing for the future. But that said, there is currently affordable housing opportunities. I'm not sure what opportunities there are right now in the community district. I can look that up and follow up. But yeah, no, we know it's an issue, and there's a lot of conversations about that. But also in Brooklyn and the rest of New York City, I recognize, especially for different communities, you mentioned the Pakistani community, but that overcrowding in one-bedroom apartments and being close to work is really an important factor. And we see that in a lot of places throughout the city, and that's why it's really important to get this project going and build more affordable housing, continue to preserve the affordable housing we have.
Thank you.
And I'm going to jump in because Marion Yoon had her hand up earlier. Just make sure. Thanks.
Can I go ahead? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. I recognize that this task force was constituted to explore building housing on this site. And Eric Adams is one of the co-chairs. So on Sunday, Eric Adams actually tweeted about the need to incentivize redeployment of underutilized existing buildings. So I'm wondering whether there has been a study of existing buildings in CB14 that could be converted, upgraded, renovated for housing, because this particular project, if built, would be to fill in open space that could become open green space in our community that really lacks community green space.
Marion, that's a really good question. And I think one of the things that we're actually going to be, I really encourage you to tune in tomorrow for the task force meeting, because we've talked a little bit about open space and how much of a priority it is for this community, and trying to achieve both goals on this site, especially given the importance of memorializing the history and how we can do that perhaps through a combination of open space that's accessible to everyone, as well as maybe an interior space as well. Because this is, as I said, not just housing, but really a project that we want to, be like an emblem or an anchor for this community, so to speak. And that means meeting lots of needs. And I know the community has needs for multiple, not just for housing, but for open space. So we're really talking about what's the right balance and how to do that. That said, right now, this is slated to be an affordable housing project, but that doesn't mean that's all it's going to be. As I mentioned, we're looking at how to incorporate different components to try to see how these needs can be met through the site. Just to address the first part of buildings that might be converted or used for affordable housing, one of the challenges at HPD is that we can work with partners who come to us, and we have programs to seek those partners. But if there's a private landlord, we need them to come to us. And we do outreach events actually for landlords, especially landlords who might be in distressed situation, to try to get them signed up for a loan that converts housing into permanently affordable housing. And we have different programs. It's a different part of the agency from what I work in. But that is always, the hard part is we provide the incentives for it, but we need the private landlords to come to us. We can't just take over buildings, so to speak, from the landlords or anything like that. So we have programs, and I think we have a program called Partners in Preservation that works a lot on that. And I can't really speak to it much in detail, but it is something we always look to expand upon. As you said, the borough president mentioned, there's a lot of buildings that we need to constantly reevaluate how to best make use of the assets and all the great things that the city has to make sure that the needs of the community, different communities in Brooklyn and throughout the city are being met.
Thank you.
Glenn, do you still have your hand up from previously, or do you have another question?
I have two more questions. If I'm
Okay. I don't see anyone else with a question at this point. Sorry, go ahead.
The physical size of this plot of land is, and the expected height of the building will be. Those are the two questions. Thank you.
Those are two good questions, and I should have that off the top of my head. Bear with me just a second. I know I have it somewhere in here, my notes. I think in general, the goal, hold on a second. I'll say the goal for this is to have, we talked initially about at least 100 units. The actual area dimension is 29,000 square feet. It's irregularly shaped because it juts out in the back. It's a little bit of a strange lot. We haven't really talked about, we're talking about this both in the workshop and in the task force. Actually, the meeting tomorrow is about design and partially getting towards height, about what's allowed and the trade-offs that come with allowing more height versus more, say, green space or more units, and how those all play together to try to see how the community prioritizes the different factors that go into making a successful project. So I would say the site is about 30,000 square feet. I don't know offhand what the allowed height is right now, but the project will go through ULURP certainly for disposition. And if there are any zoning changes, it would have to be included in that ULURP action.
Thank you.
I believe Natalia Sucre, sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name, has a question. You can go ahead if you want to unmute.
Hi, everyone. I'm Natalia Sucre. I live in CB14. My question was related to the last one, just to clarify whether there would be a rezoning required. That was whether this development will require rezoning. That was one question. I also had another question. You mentioned that the task force included major community leaders. Is there any way to know who those leaders are, who those groups are?
Yeah, of course. Let me get to the second question right now. It's actually on the website. I believe it should be on the website. So let me check if I have the list of that. If not, I'll provide it to you. I don't want to read out all the names, but I'll provide provide you with those names. Hoping I had it somewhere here. And you can actually download all the presentations. So if you download the presentations here, I should have it.
If it's available, I'll find it.
Yeah.
I just hadn't found it.
Sure. So
Thank
I have it here, and it's just Ben Talton, who's a professor of African history from Temple University, Carol Renaud from Community Board 17, Chantal Eugene Bistoun from Erasmus Hall High School for Youth and Community Development, Kathy DeMage from Campbell, Lauren Collins from the Flatbush Bid and Church Bid, Naima Oyo from Ifatayo Cultural Arts Center, Natiba Guy Clement from the Center for Brooklyn History at the Brooklyn Public Library, Robin Redmond from Flatbush Development Corporation, Pastor Ockard from Reformed Dutch Church, Reverend Hamlin from St. Paul's Church, Ron Schweiger, who's the Brooklyn Borough historian, and Samantha Bernadine from the Erasmus Hall High School, Sean Campbell, and Tyrone McDonald from Neighborhood Housing Services of Brooklyn. And I think also the council member and the borough president or the representative is usually Ryan Lynch and from the borough president's office, and Roslyn Joinville from council member Eugene's office. In terms of the rezoning, the question again, I'm trying to remember. I'm sorry, what was the question again with the rezoning? If
Just, is it established that rezoning will be required for this development?
Right. So it's not established. What's required is a ULURP, just because it's city-owned land. It's being disposed to a non-city entity. In that same ULURP, if the design needs to go through some form of rezoning, it would go through that, and that's part of the conversation that we're having in the workshop. We're not necessarily, because we want to keep it really open to like the public and not get into too much technicality about what's this RX5ZBYX, I don't know what zoning district. We try to frame it around what the height requirements are right now, whether things like providing more open space might mean a different shape of the building that might require a different zoning framework, or requiring a memorial or youth community space on a part of the building might shift some of the zoning requirements, in which case, you know, we would look at a rezoning, but it's not necessarily required. It really depends on what the priorities of the community are.
And the last hand I see now is John Dominique Bonnet.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me? Sorry. Yes, I'm John Dominique Bonnet. I live on Lennox Road and Rogers Avenue. So Community Board 17, but close to the vacant lot question. I've passed by the lot many times in the past, and I've reached out to the Community Board and also the Borough President's Office and EDC about this location in particular. And as recently as September, I was informed that there were no plans for the site. And over the history, which has been tracked on veganlandnyc.com, there have been various community members who have been interested in having the site open as green space. Since there was a 2017 report that Community Board 14 made that was recommended with a policy fellow for improving the amount of green space in the community, since it's among the lowest of all the districts in the city. So I was interested in what caused the pivot, so to speak, in moving from a site with a unique historical significance, which would be a special site for welcoming people into the history of this community in particular, and to converting it into a private development with support of these various offices after several years of interest as a public space that would be available.
So thanks for that. I think what you're talking about is an important background, and it's part of something that we're really trying to take into account of. We understand the need for public space. We're a housing agency, so we are looking to build affordable housing here. And that was, the council member and the mayor put forth that directive. But this is, as you mentioned, a really special, important history that really needs to be retold and was somewhat erased, right? This is not something that people are aware of, former African burial grounds. And we want to make the site, and one of the missions of the RFP and what we've been talking about with the task force is how do we accomplish that by not just building affordable housing, which, is also a much needed, as you heard from Shahid and others, much needed in the community, but through providing a space, whether it's for reflection or to memorialize the history, and whether that's an open space or a space that also focuses on youth. Those are the type of things, and we'd love to have you at the public workshop to talk about that and really advocate that as well, because we don't see this as a either or type of proposition. We want this to be a project that really serves the community, providing affordable housing, but also playing an important role in memorializing this very important history and being accessible to the public. So it's not just like a private residential building, a private developer. It's really an affordable housing, mixed use project with a memorialization component and other amenities as well, with interior spaces and exterior spaces.
Sean, I believe you're next.
And I also saw, John Dominique, you had a question about the commenting on the task force meetings. So they're broadcast live, but they're not, I don't believe commenting is possible. You can comment by sending us an email, and obviously we'll give you information as well as participating in the public workshops. Our intention was to make that as open as possible to everyone. So there'll definitely be opportunities as well. And if you can't make the live streaming, we'll also be posting it.
Sorry, I just wanted to jump. I just wanted to encourage people to take advantage of the meetings that are posted and to review them, because it's been impressive and really moving to be a part of conversations where there's a lot of deep thinking and both emotional and academic responses, and a lot of the conversations about open space and the needs of this community and balancing that. And there was a time where it was, that the housing wasn't presupposed, although I think it was the initial catalyst from the council member's office. And then Jean Dominique, I'm sorry, because I did try to look really quickly back into our records to see when this was brought to my attention. It happened pretty quickly, and but I thought that by September we knew about it, so I'm surprised that was the response in September, but I don't have my timeline together. Happy to continue talking to you about the series of events, and certainly happy to continue to push for additional green space as part of this project. I know that the chairs are going to try to wrap up this portion of the meeting to move on to our next agenda item, but there is still Florencia's hand up. So if you have a burning question, Florencia, go ahead. Otherwise, I think we're going to move on to the next subject.
I just wanted to ask, what kind of artifacts did they find on the grounds?
I have to look back at the reports. I mean, I know they were there were some human remains, but also some other, I'm not sure if they were historically significant or not, what really triggered or what really highlighted the importance of being taking a step back and looking at the site was the possibility of human remains when they were doing the digging. But there's actually, if you go to the website, there's some documents and there's some very detailed archaeological documents about what was found during the initial digging. And Sean, I should just say, in terms of the timeline, I don't think we knew about it either till October, so it all came together. So I'm not surprised that if the city at some point, or if there were inquiries in September and they weren't sure what the plan was at that point. There was also a flurry of activity. And
I have a really hard time keeping track of time in COVID days, so it just sort of mushes together. But yeah, we'll try to get that out. Thanks for the reminder.
And I also just want to echo the sentiments that you expressed, how like amazing it's been to be part of this process, even for me personally, just learning about the history of enslaved Africans in Flatbush, of African burial grounds. So if any of you have a chance to look at the website and really dig deep into it, it's a really interesting conversation. And also, what are priorities as New York City residents, as and including many people who are descendants of some of the people who are buried in these African burial grounds and might not even know it, but how we envision like what a just, equitable future is for this site that is open to the public, that really acknowledges the history, while also providing what is important affordable housing need right now, and serving the community as well through open space and other uses. So really encourage you to go to the website.
Thank you. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks so much, Josh. I think, Joel, are you gonna?
Sure, unless Donald or Nina or Deborah want to speak at this moment.
Sure. Can we move on to the next topic then?
Yes.
No.
So Donald, do you want to introduce the next topic, Donald?
Let Sean do that.
Okay.
No, y'all are co-chairs for a reason. Go to work.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. So we have Jonah Rogoff here from City Planning, and we also have Andy Inglesby from Transportation, and they're here to speak tonight about zoning for transit accessibility. And so we welcome them. There's information, as Sean says, on the website about this topic. But take it, Jonah.
Thanks, Joel.
You're welcome.
Hi, everyone. I think some of you are familiar faces. I worked for Councilmember Eugene way back when, but I've been at the Department of City Planning for a number of years now within the Brooklyn office. I'm really excited to be here tonight. I'm also joined by Andy Inglesby, who I know is a familiar face. We're going to be discussing the citywide zoning text amendment called Zoning for Accessibility. And we're gonna co-present together. Andy's gonna cover the first few slides, and then I'll be covering more of the technical zoning aspects of it. And we're looking forward to sharing and hearing your thoughts.
Hey, Jonah, this is Anya. Will either of you be sharing your screen this evening? Or both?
Yes. I see the share button, but it's not highlighted.
Yeah, I just have to pass. I can pass the presenter privileges over one at a time. Please sharing your screen.
Yep. If you can pass it to me, I can share. Thanks.
Okay, it should be good to go.
Great. So I'll just turn it over to Andy to start us off. Andy, are you there?
Andy, I see you're here, but we can't hear you.
Andy, I just unmuted you manually. Are you here now?
Can you hear me?
Now
yeah, I heard. Yeah.
Hi, can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, if you could speak a
Yes.
little bit louder, it'd be good.
Okay, is that better?
We can hear you.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, that works?
Keep talking.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys. Sorry about the technical difficulties. I'm actually on the video portion on my computer, and for some reason I can't connect to the audio. So I just want to say thanks a lot. As Jonah said, we're here, MTA and city planning, to talk about ZFA. Jonah, if you want to go to the next slide. So simply put, zoning for accessibility is a citywide zoning text amendment that will allow the MTA to work more efficiently with private developers to help achieve system-wide accessibility much more quickly. Now, we're going to go over the the situations that the proposal includes, but basically it's a system-wide transit and easement requirement and an expanded transit improvement bonus in high density areas. We'll be going into those two in more details during this presentation. Next. So basically our stations are old and did not plan for vertical accessibility. So 136 of the 493 subway and Staten Island Railroad stations, which is 28% of the system, is currently accessible. 26 out of the 39, which is about 64% of the Long Island Railroad and Metro North Railroad stations within the city limits in the MTA system are accessible. And it's important to note that ADA accessible stations, they all include many features to make the stations accessible, including individuals with disabilities. But the ZFA amendment focuses on vertical accessibility only. Next. So basically, this slide is pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, we have a lot of different cadres of New Yorkers that would be that benefit from an accessible station. People with disabilities, parents that try to utilize the system with strollers and carriages, the entire senior population, and people with temporary injuries. And because of the lack of accessibility, very often a subway ride that should take minutes can take hours. Next. So to put an even finer point on that, of the 8.4 million New York City residents, 550,000 residents have an ambulatory disability. There's 500,000 children that are under 5, and there's 1.2 million residents that are 65 and over. So obviously, the rate of seniors is double the from 2005 to 2015. The number of New Yorkers over 65 grew by 19.2%, which was double the rate of the total population. So obviously, we have a problem that we're trying to address. Next. And that is why we at the MTA have made a historic commitment to accessibility in our latest capital plan. We have more than $5 billion dedicated to making 77 stations accessible, and that's 70 subway stations and 7 Metro North and Long Island Railroad stations that are within the city limits. 43% of New York City transit stations, serving over 60% of riders, will be fully accessible by the end of this 2024 capital program. And our goal is to have no subway customer more than 2 stations away from an accessible station. You guys are very familiar with the the 2020 to 24 capital program, because I have been to you guys on a couple of occasions for the Avenue H station along the Brighton line, which is still on schedule, by the way, and we're looking to have that accessible by the end of June of this year. And the Church Avenue BQ station is also in the 2020 to 24 capital program. Next. Okay, so this slide shows that elevator construction is very challenging in the current environment. The top right image shows an example of how small the clearance is between buildings and our elevated stations, especially in the outer boroughs. There's just no room to put an elevator in many cases. And then underground utilities need to be completely relocated for us to install an elevator. And often we open up the sidewalk to find other utilities that were not marked, and that adds significant additional time and cost to our projects. And so we've enumerated some of the other challenges that we face in this slide. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jonah to take you through the rest of the presentation, and we'll be back for Q&A.
Thanks, Andy. So zoning is in place to help alleviate some of these burdens, as Andy mentioned, and specifically support transit improvements. Zoning can be used as a tool for ensuring greater coordination and alignment between new development and transit station needs, often by leveraging station access improvements in places where development investment is already occurring. This can lead to not only a better designed station, but also a better sidewalk and public realm in front of a station. Current zoning provisions related to transit generally consist of transit easement requirements and station improvement bonuses. Transit easements have traditionally been used to provide space for new station entrances, passageways, or ancillary facilities that support subway lines like emergency egress or ventilation. However, in zoning, there really isn't a consistent framework for facilitating these easements on development sites near stations. And these provisions currently only apply in just a couple of areas, so including along the 2nd Avenue subway line and more recently in the Special Inwood zoning district. As a result, we really think that there are missed opportunities for MTA to locate ADA access at optimal locations next to stations. And this is just an example of one at the 4th and 9th Street F and G line. So in zoning, there are also floor area bonuses to incentivize the construction and space for station improvements. However, these bonuses are only limited to a handful of areas in central business districts. Under the current program, only sites next to subway stations can take advantage of the improvement bonus program, and the application process itself can be really time consuming and involve a lot of risk for the development schedule. So to address some limitations in zoning, we're proposing the citywide text amendment called Zoning for Accessibility, with the key objective of creating more opportunities for accessibility across the transit system. Oops. So in particular, the proposal has 3 goals. First, to extend the easement requirement system-wide to most sites adjacent to stations. Second, provide zoning flexibility on sites where easements are provided to minimize potential burdens and really ensure that an easement can be constructed. And third, increase the participation in the transit bonus program by expanding its applicability to more high-density parts of the city. The first component of the proposal is a system-wide easement requirement that would assist MTA with identifying opportunities for locating future station access points and other station facilities. As part of the requirement, all developments and enlargements on lots within 50 feet of mass transit stations would need to file an application with the MTA as well as with the chairperson of the City Planning Commission to first determine whether an easement on the lot is needed, to help facilitate station access improvements, whether now or in the future. This requirement would apply in residential zoning districts that support multifamily apartment buildings, which are generally compatible with transit-related uses. These would include R5 districts with commercial overlays, and R5D districts, as well as all higher density districts. The proposal would also apply in medium and high density commercial districts, as well as all manufacturing districts. And while the process of obtaining a certification would be required for most sites within 50 feet of a station, I just want to note that it's anticipated that MTA will only ask for an easement in limited places where there's the most optimal opportunities for future access. So how does this apply in Community District 14? We prepared a map showing the stations. As Andy mentioned, there are proposed upgrades to Avenue H and Church Avenue. The junction stop at the 2 and 5 line also has full ADA access already, but the remaining stations along the B and Q line, as well as the 18th Avenue F line, would be subject to the easement. So in consultation with the developer and the MTA, we would work to determine the necessary easement for future station upgrades, which could really vary by shape and size. So underground subway stations could occupy multiple levels below grade, while elevated stations could take up multiple floors above grade. The horizontal footprint of an easement could also vary depending on the type of access needed. An elevator could take up less space, whereas a new station entrance that requires a staircase, an elevator, and turnstiles could require a larger easement. And there are also different types of easements, whether for a future station access point, or in some circumstances for a substation that could require a larger volume below grade. So now taking a closer look at site-specific challenges, we often find that sites face specific zoning issues or barriers that limit the ability to provide an easement. First, the easement itself can just take up developable floor area, which can be challenging for many developers. Second, its shape and size can occupy a large amount of space, and it can be tough to fit both an easement and development within the building envelope. Third, easements can also restrict the ability to provide ground floor uses and parking spaces. And lastly, depending on the type of the development, there could be issues with adjacent uses, specifically residential. So in order to better facilitate or accommodate easements and improve how they're constructed, we're proposing to provide sites with a set of targeted zoning relief related to floor area, open space, height and setbacks, parking, uses, and streetscapes. And just a diagram to help illustrate what this targeted relief would be. So where easements are required, the proposed zoning would first exempt easements from a development's floor area, as well as increase the maximum lot coverage in certain districts. And where easement areas are located outside of buildings, we would treat these as permitted obstructions. Second, to offer more flexibility in the building envelope itself, we would allow street wall flexibility around the easement and additional height of either 10 feet or 20 feet in R7 and above districts. Third, where providing space for parking can directly conflict with space for an easement, we would propose parking relief by deducting 15 spaces from the total number of required parking spaces, and then waive parking for sites less than 10,000 square feet in lot area. Fourth, to support activity in front of the stations, we would allow temporary uses within an easement volume until such space is needed for a new station entrance. This is really for circumstances where an easement is needed, but the station entrance is maybe built out a little later. And then we'd also allow commercial uses within 30 feet of an easement to promote compatible uses and activity around the station entry and exit points. Finally, we would exempt easements from streetscape requirements, which can kind of be a barrier for where the street wall is located, and then ensure that curb cuts are not located within 30 feet of an easement to minimize any conflicts with vehicles. So on top of the zoning relief, some additional relief may be needed for unique site conditions. In other situations, certain developers may want to provide more circulation or open space around the easement, just as shown in like the photo on the right. So to allow this flexibility, more relief would be available through a discretionary review process, either as a City Planning Commission authorization that would allow a height increase of up to 25% of what's allowed, or if more height relief is needed, then through a full City Planning Commission special permit, which would entail a full ULURP process. While the easement requirement only applies to sites with a lot area of at least 5,000 square feet, easements may also be provided voluntarily on smaller sites less than 5,000 square feet. For these small sites that provide an easement, we also want to extend the same set of zoning relief. And then on sites with an existing building being converted, targeted relief would be provided to facilitate an easement within that building. In other instances, instead of a transit easement, additional sidewalk space or a clear path around an existing or future station entrance may be needed. And so we're also proposing to allow some flexibility for the location of a street wall where a clear path is being provided. The second part of the proposal is an expanded transit bonus program for sites close to a mass transit station in high density zoning districts, specifically in R9 and R10 districts. I just want to be really clear and transparent. This expansion would actually not affect any parts of Community District 14, since there are no high density zoning districts within the community district. But I just wanted to quickly share for your background and awareness. Currently, developers adjacent to certain stations in central business districts can apply for a 20% bonus in floor area when constructing a set of station improvements, which also does require approval by the City Planning Commission. Under the current proposal, we would like to expand that geography to cover more stations from the ones highlighted in purple to the ones in blue, and also broaden the applicability to allow developments providing off-site improvements to take advantage of the bonus, which would allow developments within 1,500 feet of a station in central business districts, and then within 500 feet of a station in other high density R9 and R10 districts. So to conclude, zoning for accessibility proposes first to establish a framework for coordinating the siting and provision of transit station improvements with new developments on adjacent sites. As part of this framework, a required consultation process would apply to all developments and enlargements on zoning lots within 50 feet of mass transit stations. Where easements are needed, targeted relief from zoning would be given in order to minimize potential challenges for construction and just to better accommodate these improvements. Second, for sites below 5,000 square feet or where building conversions are being proposed, the requirement would not apply. But when easements are voluntarily provided, we would also like to extend some zoning relief. And then where more relief from zoning is needed, we'd like to set up a discretionary review process to apply for such relief. And lastly, the text amendment would include an expanded geography where the transit bonus would apply. Although again, this would not affect any stations within Community District 14. So just to end on the process moving forward, the zoning for accessibility is a citywide text amendment. It's not technically a ULURP application, but it follows a really similar process. So we referred out the application on April 5th to all community boards for 60 days. And then following the community board review, this would then go to the borough president for 30 days, followed by the city planning commission for 60 days, and then finally the city council for 50 days, with the goal of adopting the proposal by the end of the year. And that concludes the presentation, and we're happy to take any questions or hear your feedback.
Any questions? Questions, anyone?
Donald, I don't see any hands, but may I jump in with one?
Absolutely, because I have
a
a question after you.
Okay, and then I see Nina's hand did go up, but just quickly, first of all, Jonah, thank you for saying the word developable. I sometimes wonder if it's a word, but a real city planner said it, so yes. But Andy, I wonder if you could speak to, I'm sorry, two things. Let me go back to Jonah. You showed a map of all of the stations in our district, but there's a subset of those to which this could potentially apply. It wouldn't apply to all of them, I don't imagine, because, for instance, our station houses that are on road bridges, I don't think there's anything that could develop out of those. So I'm wondering if you have or could maybe in a follow-up provide the subset of stations that could potentially be party to this zoning text amendment.
Sure, I can provide that. I would just clarify that it would apply to all lots greater than 5,000 square feet within 50 feet of the footprint of the station.
Okay, so that's probably more than I thought then. Okay, thanks for that. Yeah. And then Andy, could you speak to the idea of MTA or New York City Transit easements isn't new. There's a precedent for this, and you have easements on properties adjacent to subway lines. Is this unprecedented, or does it fit into that pre-established model?
Actually, that might be a question for Jonah. Jonah, do you know about the easement?
Sorry, Sean, could you repeat the question? What model are you referring to?
Yeah, I'm thinking about the easements on properties that are adjacent to subway, so that I know there's easements like along lot lines that abut the slopes down to the tracks that are subgrade. And I think, and there might be some easements around properties that have a wall that separates their property line from transit property line. So I'm just wondering if these easements would be similar to those easements in practice.
It's a good question. Jogging my memory of land use law, my limited knowledge of that. I think, yeah, generally speaking, there are different types of easements, and they're enforced in different ways, mostly by Department of Finance or Department of Building. I think what we're referring, and actually there are certain requirements for developers adjacent to like underground rails to like consult with MTA. I think what we're trying to do here is kind of create a consistent framework for that, because they're controlled in different ways, and they also don't live in zoning. So we want to ensure that there's a required consultation process that applies system-wide.
Okay.
Sean, we also have construction easements where, when we've done ADA projects or station renewal projects, especially along the Brighton line with the platforms right next to people's backyards, what we've taken construction easements, which means that, whenever we have to go back and maintain the platforms, we're able to do that with that kind of an easement. I don't know if that's what you were referring to, but
yeah, that's part of what was in my head. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you both. I didn't want to get too far in the weeds, but I appreciate that extra insight. And
I also just wanted to, before we continue with the Q&A, I just wanted to make the point that ZFA will work to complement our current and future capital plans. It will not in any way replace the capital plan commitments for funding station accessibility projects now or in the future. So just want to make sure that that's very clear.
Good, thanks. Nina, Donald, then Glenn, then Greg Alvarez.
So my questions don't actually have to do with zoning specifically, but are kind of more generalized. So you're talking about working together with private developers and creating this accessibility. Given how often the few elevators that do exist are out of service, who's taking responsibility for the maintenance and the safety issues and so on? And also, what kind of planning is going into trying to look for some type of connection, because so we're getting ADA access on Avenue H, which is wonderful, but the subway lines, the closest subways that interface with bus lines are at Newkirk and Avenue J and Avenue M. And it's like, so great. You get off in your wheelchair and then what? You've got 5 blocks to travel to get anywhere else.
So as far as maintenance is concerned, so we expect relatively few elevators created through this proposal to be maintained by the private developers. Most will be maintained by the MTA. Elevators in easements and elevators built by a developer outside of their building will both of them will be maintained by the MTA. If built by a private developer outside their building, they will enter into a maintenance buyout agreement with the MTA to fund the anticipated cost of maintenance and replacement of the elevator at the end of its useful life, which is usually within 15 to 20 years.
Okay.
Those are, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Next question.
I think it's you, Donald.
Yeah, just following up on Nina's thing. You're saying the MTA will maintain them. I know at Union Square, there are 2 escalators there under the Zeckendorf Towers. And every time they break, there's always an argument over who's responsible for fixing them. I'm wondering if that will be an ongoing issue with escalators or elevators in our district. Zeckendorf says it's not their responsibility. The MTA keeps saying it's the MTA's responsibility. So there's this whole back and forth thing, and the elevators and escalators never get fixed or take months to get fixed.
Well, I mean that's a specific station that you're mentioning. So I mean I can find out. I don't cover Manhattan, but I've heard that the MTA stance is that it's definitely Zeckendorf, but I will leave it to my Manhattan counterpart to corroborate or correct.
And then
I'll take
Zeckendorf,
that
of course,
back,
says it's the MTA, but I just want to make sure it doesn't
Right.
happen in our district.
Right.
Yeah, that was my question. Next question, anybody?
Is Glenn and then Gregory.
Okay, Glenn.
Hello, Jonah. It's good to see you.
It's here.
I'm wondering if you're concerned about neighborhood resistance. We have, for example, a building looking to go up on Cortelli Road, which is as of right 7 stories, and they're proposing 9 stories for affordable housing. And there's a lot of resistance in the neighborhood. And you're offering 10, 20 feet, 20% I'm just wondering how you plan on dealing with resistance. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think where we are right now is we created this robust proposal. We're referring it out, and we want to hear feedback. So, if you have feedback on height, whether it's height or setback or whatever, that's valuable to us and important for us to hear. I think what's helpful to know is that even though maybe it sounds ambitious, like we're increasing the height by 20 feet or 10 feet, these are more one-off, things, and I don't anticipate, even if you give a developer an extra 10 or 20 feet, I don't anticipate, necessarily they may need to use it. I think it's more of just we're trying to create a more holistic system to capture all the different circumstances or site conditions citywide. So I don't know if that helps answer your question, but I definitely take that to heart. I think it's an important thing to consider.
Well, based on the way you answered that, I'd just like to point out that as buildings go up, the higher the floors tend to be cheaper to build, right? Because the purchase of the land and the architects and all that's already accounted for. So I would imagine that most developers would be very happy to take advantage of whatever you offer them. If you offer them 20 feet, they're going to take it for the most part. All right, I'm done. Thank you.
Greg Alvarez.
Yes, hello. Thank you for the presentation as well. Just two questions. One, just sort of, I think, building on Glenn's as well. So it seems like this is more of a, carrot rather than a stick approach. What about the situations where the developer may resist it from their end? Is there a mechanism within the zoning requirements that still gives city planning the ability to secure the easements if you experience developer pushback?
That is a good question. I don't know if Andy, you want to speak to that, if you're based on your experience with easements.
Yeah, that is a good question that I have to defer for an answer for at this time. I don't know, Jonah, if you want to add any more, but yeah, I'll have to look into any history.
Okay. Yeah, if we can get an answer on that, that'd be great. And then secondly, also building on Glenn's referral of the Cortelia Road situation we had, has there been any thought in city planning to perhaps use this approach in other situations? For instance, you had mentioned before that it is sort of ad hoc, and we experience it with Cortelia Road, ad hoc in terms of getting developers to participate, say, in infrastructure improvements to a station other than accessibility. Has there been any thought, from planning on that side to maybe address those sorts of situations? Because, that's certainly come up on our end before.
Just so I understand the question, Greg, are you asking if we would apply an easement to other public priorities? Is that?
Not necessarily. No, not in the easement context. So I'm saying it has this sort of mechanism where you're offering some zoning bonuses, to maybe get something back from the developer, some sort of benefits for the community, from an MTA perspective or anything really, that maybe this can be used as more of a formalized way to do that as well.
Yeah, I can say that we use bonuses in zoning for very specific purposes, and from a legal standpoint, these are intended to ameliorate density issues. So the scope is somewhat limited generally for open space, for affordable housing in the case of the voluntary inclusionary program, if many of you are aware. And in the case of station improvements to help facilitate ADA access and circulation. So I don't know if that helps answer your question, but it's I'm happy to describe more of it, but there's usually for a narrower scope that's related to
Sure. Yeah, no. And it just seems like if you're moving into this area of improvements to MTA stations, maybe it can be used for, a wider purpose, like for extending extending a platform, for instance, at Cortellia or something like that, that might be helpful in those situations. And you bring up a good point about mandatory inclusionary housing, because again, Cortellia Road, that was an MIH proposal. And what I would say to you is that because of the pushback that was on that particular application, it might make sense to perhaps exclude those density bonuses where you have MIH. You don't want to necessarily allow developers to double dip. I don't think we would necessarily want to see that. Particularly for those projects that are near transit stations.
Thanks for that. I would just quickly add that one of the challenges with layering different bonuses is that once you do that, you have to accommodate more height. So for those reasons, we often apply bonuses to higher density areas. And that's also one of the reasons why we want to allow discretionary review. And so just to allow for a developer to apply for a bonus, they have to make the case for it and go before the city planning commission. So it's not a just crossing a check mark. That it involves a substantial application process.
Okay, thank you.
And Godet, next question.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. Good to see you. So I wanted to revert back to the MTA capital plan and the Church Avenue station getting the elevator that we've been so desperate to receive given our populations here. And so I'm just curious, how do either of you presenters know where the elevator would likely be located, on the Church Avenue side or on the Caton side? And during that construction to rehab the site facility for this access, what would the anticipated duration of closures be? So thank you very much. Appreciate your attention.
Sure. So this is Andy from MTA, so I can take that. So 70 stations, 70 station MTA New York City transit stations were designated as being in the AGA program when we announced it in late 2019. Due to COVID, obviously, we had to slow down the process. But in late 2020, we announced the first 8 of those 70 stations. So Church Avenue is not one of the first 8. So we don't have any details yet as far as the actual elevator placement or when exactly the construction will start. Obviously, I'll be coming to CB14 once we have that information. But we're concentrating on the first 8 for now. We awarded that contract, and once we have more information about Church Avenue, I'll be bringing it to CB14.
Great, thank you very much.
Thanks for the questions. They're very, very forward-thinking, and I'm sure I'll have the answers for you at some point, but just not right now, because it's still in planning right now.
Can we limit this to maybe 2 or 3 more questions and then move on to the next topic?
Actually, Donald, I don't see any other hands at this point.
Great.
Except mine.
Oh,
I haven't handouts. And I was going to try to make a wrap up comment because I saw no other hands and I see that it is getting late.
yes.
Mike, is city planning or New York City Transit looking for a community board 14 recommendation or letter of support, or is this primarily a community notification meeting and an invitation to participate in your presentations at Borough Hall?
We are looking for a letter. I mean, we would love a letter of support or recommendations. So it's similar to a ULURP, except there doesn't have to be a formal public hearing. It's a little more loose in that regard, but we do hope that you support the proposal and provide us comments.
Okay, I'll work with this committee to come up with, I think the letter probably will be a sounding board for some of the concerns and a request for some assurances that it moves forward. As it moves forward, there aren't things like Greg Alvarez mentioned, like double dipping opportunities and stuff like that. So I'll try to I'll review this meeting and work with the committee and other interested board members to try to put that together. I don't know if it's going to be like just a basic green light, red light, but it will be, you know, a demonstration of the questions, concerns, and if they're all met, support.
Sean, will we have the presentation of the website, the slides?
I'm so glad you asked. Yeah, Jonah, can you provide that for us so we can add it to our projects page?
Absolutely.
And then everybody, thanks. And then everybody remembers, I'm sure, that we also have the recordings of all of our meetings up on the website for your viewing pleasure.
With that, let's move on to Revel.
Yeah, Donald, sorry, they're a no-show, so you could wrap up this meeting.
Okay, is there any other business that anybody wants to bring up? Or we'll close for the evening.
Only the thanks to Sean and Anya for two very informative presentations.
They always do a great job.
Thanks.
And to Jonah and Andy, of course.
All right, with that, that's
Our
said,
pleasure.
I guess we'll see everybody at the general meeting.
Next Monday.
Next Monday, yes.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
Have a good night.
You
Very
too.
good.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Be safe.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.